We need to discuss what happens to Dad's estate, and her. I heard Kristin say it from the kitchen, where I was making coffee, that nobody would thank me for. After 20 years, I had learned to become invisible. After 20 years, I had perfected the art of disappearing in my own home. But what Kristin and her siblings didn't know was that I had spent those 20 years quietly saving their lives, and their father had documented every single moment of it. Drop a comment and let me know where you re-listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's part of this community. My name is Helen Marquez Calloway. I'm 58 years old. And the day my husband was buried was the day his children finally learned who I really was. Let me start at the beginning. I met David Calloway in 2003, at a grief support group in Portland, Oregon. He had lost his wife, Marianne, to ovarian cancer 8 months earlier. I had lost my daughter, Sophia, to a drunk driver 6 months before that. We were two broken people sitting in a church basement, drinking bad coffee, trying to remember how to breathe. We didn't fall in love immediately. We fell into understanding. He knew what it felt like to wake up reaching for someone who wasn't there. I knew what it felt like to set the table for one less person. We didn't have to explain our pain to each other. We just sat in it together. David had 3 children from his marriage to Marianne. Kristin was 17 when we met, a senior in high school, beautiful and furious and drowning in grief she didn't know how to process. Thomas was 15, quiet and withdrawn, disappearing into video games and books to avoid feeling anything. And little Emma was only 10, still young enough to cry openly, still asking when mommy was coming home. They needed their father. They needed stability and love and patience. What they got instead was me. I understood, even then, that I was walking into a minefield. These children had just lost their mother. The last thing they wanted was a replacement. I told David that we should take things slowly, that I would give them space, that I would never try to be their mom. Just be yourself, David said. They'll come around eventually. He was wrong. In 20 years, they never came around. Not once. Kristin set the tone from the beginning. The first time I came to dinner at their house, she looked me up and down and said, "You're not as pretty as my mom was." She was 17. She was grieving. I told myself not to take it personally. But it got worse. When David and I got engaged a year later, Kristin refused to attend the wedding. Thomas came but sat in the back with his headphones in, not looking at anyone. Emma was the flower girl, David insisted, but she cried through the entire ceremony, not from joy but from grief. "You're replacing our mother," Kristin screamed at David the night before the wedding. "How could you do this to us? How could you do this to her memory?" David tried to explain that moving forward wasn't the same as forgetting. That loving me didn't mean he had stopped loving Marianne. That the heart has room for more than one person. Kristin didn't listen. She moved out 3 months after the wedding, at 18, and barely spoke to her father for 2 years. That was my fault. According to her, everything was my fault. The years passed. I learned my place in the Calloway family hierarchy. I had none. At Thanksgiving, I cooked the turkey, set the table, cleaned the dishes, and ate in the kitchen because there wasn't room at the dining table. The children had friends joining, you see. And partners. And eventually spouses and grandchildren. But there was never room for Helen. At Christmas, I wrapped the gifts, decorated the tree, prepared the feast, and sat in the corner while the family opened presents around me. No one bought me anything. No one acknowledged my presence. I was furniture. Less than furniture. At least furniture served a visible purpose. When Kristin got married in 2010, I was not in the family photos. "It's just immediate family," she explained, not meeting my eyes. I had been married to her father for 6 years. I was not immediate family. When Thomas got married in 2014, I was seated at a table near the kitchen. Not with the family. Not with the other guests. Near the kitchen, where the catering staff came and went. David didn't notice until the reception was half over. By then, it was too late to move without causing a scene. When Emma got married in 2018, she didn't send me an invitation at all. I found out about the wedding from a Facebook post, 3 weeks before the date. I attended anyway. David wanted me there, and sat in the last pew, alone, while David walked his youngest daughter down the aisle. The photographer asked me to step out of the family portrait. I did. I always did. I could have fought. I could have demanded respect. I could have told David to make his children treat me like a human being. But I knew what those children had been through. I knew what it felt like to lose someone you loved more than life itself. I had lost my Sophia, my baby girl, my reason for existing. I knew that grief makes people cruel, makes them irrational, makes them lash out at the safest target. I was the safest target. So I let them lash out. And while they were busy hating me, I was busy saving them. It started with Thomas. In 2008, when Thomas was 20 years old, he got into trouble. Bad trouble. He had fallen in with the wrong crowd at college, drinking, drugs, the kind of reckless behavior that young men engage in when they running from pain they see ain't name. He was arrested for possession with intent to distribute. He was facing 5 years in prison. David was devastated. He didn't have the money for a good lawyer. The medical bills from Marianne's illness had drained their savings years ago. Thomas was going to be assigned a public defender, was going to be convicted, was going to lose his entire future. I had money. My daughter Sophia had a life insurance policy that I had never touched, because spending it felt like profiting from her death. It sat in an account, gathering interest, waiting for a purpose. I hired the best criminal defense attorney in Oregon. Quietly. Through a third party. I told David it was a legal aid program that I had found through my work. I paid $80,000 in legal fees. The charges were reduced to simple possession, then dismissed entirely when the lawyer found procedural errors in the arrest. Thomas never knew. David never knew. Thomas went back to college, graduated, became an accountant, got married, had 2 children. He's never once said thank you, because he doesn't know there's anything to thank me for. Then there was Emma. In 2012, Emma was diagnosed with a heart condition that required surgery. She was 24, working as a waitress, with no health insurance and no savings. David and I talked about selling the house. We talked about taking out loans. We talked about bankruptcy. And then I quietly liquidated my retirement account, the one I had built over 30 years of teaching elementary school, and paid for Emma's surgery in full. I told David that the hospital had a charitable care program for young patients. I forged documents to make it look legitimate. Emma had her surgery. She recovered. She met her husband in cardiac rehab. She has 2 healthy children now. She's never once said thank you, because she doesn't know there's anything to thank me for. And then there was Kristin. Kristin, who hated me most of all. Kristin, who blamed me for replacing her mother. Kristin, who hadn't spoken a kind word to me in 20 years. In 2016, Kristin's husband left her. He had been having an affair for 3 years. And when Kristin found out, he didn't apologize, he asked for a divorce. He wanted the house, the car, full custody of their 2 children. He had a better lawyer. He had more money. Kristin was going to lose everything. I hired a private investigator. I spent $40,000 documenting the affair, tracking his hidden assets, building a case that Kristin's divorce attorney used to destroy him in court. Kristin got the house, the car, full custody, and alimony for 10 years. She thought she won because justice was on her side. She didn't know that justice had cost me every penny I had saved since marrying her father. David knew about all of it. That's the part that surprised his children, I think. David knew. He had known from the beginning. He had kept records, receipts, bank statements, letters I had written explaining what I was doing and why. He kept them in a safe deposit box, with instructions that they be revealed after his death. They won't listen while I'm alive, he told me once, when I asked why he didn't just tell them. They love me too much to hear that their cruelty hurt you. But when I'm gone, they'll have to face it. They'll have to see what kind of woman you really are. I don't need them to see, I said. I didn't do it for recognition. I know. That's why they need to see. David died on a Tuesday in April, 3 months after his 72nd birthday. Pancreatic cancer. The same disease that took my grandmother, that takes so many people too quickly to say goodbye. I held his hand at the end. I told him I loved him. I thanked him for 20 years of being seen by at least one person. Make them read the file, he whispered. It was one of the last things he said. The funeral was held on a Saturday. The children came, of course, all 3 of them, with their spouses and children, filling the first 3 pews of the church. I sat in the 4th pew, behind them, as I always had. They didn't turn around. They didn't acknowledge me. They cried for their father, and I cried alone. After the burial, we gathered at the attorney's office for the reading of the will. Lawrence Kendrick had been David's lawyer for 15 years. He was a kind man, patient, with the sort of gentle manner that made difficult conversations bearable. He sat at the head of the conference table, a thick folder in front of him, and looked at each of us in turn. Before I read the will, Lawrence said, I need to explain something. David gave me specific instructions about how this meeting should proceed. He asked me to present certain documents before the bequests are read. He felt it was important for his children to understand the full context of his decisions. Kristin shifted impatiently in her chair. What kind of documents? These. Lawrence opened the folder. Inside were stacks of papers, photographs, bank statements, letters in David's handwriting. Your father called this file what Helen did. He asked me to review its contents with you before we proceed. Thomas frowned. What does she have to do with Dad's will? Everything, as it turns out. Lawrence pulled out the first document. Let's start with 2008. Thomas, were you aware that you were facing a 5-year prison sentence for drug charges that year? Thomas's face went pale. His wife, beside him, looked at him with surprise. Apparently he had never told her about that chapter of his life. The charges were dismissed, Thomas said quietly. Yes. They were. Because a criminal defense attorney named Harold Vance filed a series of motions that ultimately resulted in the case being thrown out. Thomas stared at the receipt. His hands were shaking. I don't understand, he said. Dad said there was a legal aid program. There was no legal aid program. There was only your stepmother, who chose to spend her daughter's life insurance money to save your future. Lawrence pulled out another document. Emma. In 2012, you required emergency heart surgery that cost $175,000. Do you remember how that was paid for? Emma nodded slowly. A charitable care program at the hospital. There was no charitable care program. Lawrence slid another set of papers across the table. Your stepmother liquidated her entire retirement account, 30 years of savings, to pay for your surgery. She forged documents to make it look like a hospital program because she didn't want you to feel indebted to someone you had never accepted as family. Emma's hand flew to her chest, to the scar that ran down her sternum. That's not possible, she whispered. She hated us. We hated her. Why would she? She didn't hate you, Lawrence said gently. She understood you. She had lost a daughter of her own. She knew what grief does to people, especially young people. And she chose to respond to your pain with generosity instead of resentment. He turned to Kristin. And finally, Kristin. In 2016, you won a divorce case that by all accounts you should have lost. Your husband had better resources, better lawyers, and fewer scruples. You won because someone hired a private investigator to document his affairs and hidden assets. That someone was not your father. He slid the final set of documents across the table, invoices from the PI firm, receipts for $40,000 in investigative services, a letter from the PI explaining what they had found. Your stepmother spent every penny she had saved since marrying your father to make sure you kept your children. She did this despite the fact that you had excluded her from your wedding, refused to let her in your family photos, and hadn't spoken a kind word to her in over a decade. Kristin was crying now. Silently, tears streaming down her face. Why, she asked, her voice breaking. Why would she do all of this? We treated her like garbage. We pretended she didn't exist. Why would she spend everything she had on people who never gave her anything? Lawrence looked at me. So did everyone else. I took a breath. Because I know what it feels like to lose a child, I said. I lost my Sophia when she was 19 years old. She was hit by a drunk driver on her way home from college. I never got to say goodbye. I never got to watch her grow up, get married, have children of her own. My voice was steady. I had practiced this speech in my head for years. When I met your father, I met 3 children who were drowning in grief. You had lost your mother. You were angry and scared and hurting. And I understood that pain better than anyone. I had lived it. I was still living it. I looked at Thomas, at Emma, at Kristin, these 3 people who had spent 20 years pretending I didn't exist. I never expected you to love me. I never expected you to accept me. But I made a promise to myself, the day I married your father, that I would protect you the way I couldn't protect Sophia. I would make sure you had futures, even if you never knew I had anything to do with it. I would love you in secret, because secret love was the only kind you would accept. Kristin broke down first. She pushed back from the table and sobbed, deep, wrenching sobs that shook her whole body. Thomas followed a moment later, tears sliding down his cheeks. Emma sat frozen, her hand still pressed to her heart, staring at me like she was seeing me for the first time. I'm sorry, Kristin gasped. Helen, I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I didn't, you couldn't have known. I didn't want you to know. I just wanted you to be okay. Lawrence cleared his throat. There's one more thing. The will itself. He pulled out a single sheet of paper. David's estate, after debts and taxes, amounts to approximately $1.2 million. This includes the house, his retirement accounts, and his life insurance. David's instructions are as follows. He read from the document. To my children, Kristin, Thomas, and Emma, I leave my love, my pride, and my hope that you will finally see what I have seen for 20 years, that the woman who shared my life was not your enemy, but your guardian angel. I leave to each of you the sum of $1. As a symbol of the fact that you have already received far more than any inheritance could provide, you have received Helen's sacrifices, her patience, her unconditional love. Thomas looked up sharply. $1? Lawrence continued reading. To my wife, Helen Marquez Calloway, I leave the remainder of my estate, the house we shared, my retirement accounts, my life insurance, and everything else I own. I leave it to her not because she needs it, but because she has earned it 1,000 times over. She gave everything she had to children who gave her nothing in return. She loved without expectation. She sacrificed without recognition. She was the best person I have ever known, and I am grateful every day that I found her in that church basement, two broken people learning how to breathe again. The room was silent except for crying. There's a final paragraph, Lawrence said softly. To my children, I hope this will as a shock. I hope it forces you to reckon with what you have done and what you have failed to do. Your stepmother asked for nothing from you, not love, not recognition, not even basic courtesy. And yet she gave you everything. If there is any justice in this world, you will spend the rest of your lives trying to deserve her. I know I did. I hope you will too. Lawrence set down the paper. That concludes the reading of the will. After the meeting, in the parking lot, Kristin approached me. I don't know what to say, she said. 20 years of treating you like you were nothing, and I didn't do it for thank yous, I said. I did it because you were David's children. And because I remember what it felt like to be young and hurting and not knowing how to ask for help. Can you forgive us? I thought about the question. 20 years of being invisible. 20 years of cooking meals no one thanked me for, cleaning up after holidays I wasn't welcome at, watching from the back pew of churches while life happened without me. I forgave you a long time ago, I said. Forgiveness was the only way I could keep giving. Kristin hugged me. It was the first time she had ever touched me voluntarily. Thomas hugged me next. Then Emma. We stood in that parking lot, for people who should have been family all along, finally holding each other after 20 years of distance. It's been 8 months since David's funeral. Things are different now. Not perfect, 20 years of damage doesn't heal in 8 months, but different. Kristin calls me every Sunday. Thomas invited me to his son's birthday party and introduced me as Grandma Helen. Emma sends me photos of her children, with captions like, they want to know when Grandma is visiting. Grandma. They call me Grandma now. I kept the house. I kept David's retirement accounts. I kept everything he left me. But I also set up education funds for all 7 grandchildren, using the money I inherited. I figure it's fitting, the money goes back to the family, the way I always intended. David was right. They needed to see the file. They needed to know what I had done. Not for my sake. For theirs. They needed to know that they had been loved, even when they couldn't feel it. They needed to know that someone had been fighting for them in the shadows, even when they thought they were alone. That's what family does. Real family. Family loves without conditions, without recognition, without expecting anything in return. For 20 years, I was invisible to my stepchildren. But I was never invisible to myself. I knew what I was doing. I knew why I was doing it. And now, finally, they know too. If you've ever loved someone who couldn't love you back, a stepchild, a parent, a sibling, anyone, hit that like button and share this story. And remember, the love you give is never wasted, even when it's not returned. It changes you. It makes you bigger, kinder, stronger. And sometimes, when you least expect it, it comes back to you multiplied. They never called me Mom. But they call me Grandma now. And that's enough. It's more than enough. It's everything.